This video is brought to you by Nvidia and MSI's brand new Stealth Studio laptops. These things are beyond fast, sporting an RTX 40 series GPU, allowing you to enjoy cutting-edge features like DLSS 3, ray tracing, and more. Click the link below to check it out for yourself or stick around to the end of the video to learn more. Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Man, I was really pumped for this one. The first game, Jedi Fallen Order, was flawed in some key aspects, but it absolutely nailed Star Wars in a way that very few things were nailing Star Wars back in 2019. This arrived at around about the same time as The Rise of Skywalker did, and the contrast between the two takes on Lucas's seminal setting couldn't have been more stark. Respawn's rendition of Star Wars wasn't safe or predictable, it really mixed things up a lot, but it was still possessed of the same characters, lore, setting, and swashbuckling adventure that made the original trilogy work so well. Respawn felt like this steady hand holding the boat of Star Wars fandom in place amidst the rocky seas of a divisive sequel trilogy and some spotty standalone spin-offs. But yeah, the game had its problems. I mean, combat for one, it was trying to strike a balance between challenging and accessible. It was remixing Souls-like elements into a Star Wars lightsabers and blasters setting. The results were pretty mixed. The exploration and traversal as well was a little tired. This was well after the Uncharted and modern Tomb Raider games had done their thing, and crawling around on rock faces and grills like some Force-sensitive Nathan Drake left more than a few people a little underwhelmed. Still, despite those shortcomings, I loved that game. In large part because I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and Fallen Order was just a brilliant Star Wars adventure full of brilliantly realized characters. For that reason, I was always going to be pretty easy to please when it comes to a sequel. If it was just kind of the same game with a whole new storyline told with the same deft touch, I would have been more than happy with that, to be honest with you. But Respawn had absolutely no intention of resting on their laurels, because Jedi Survivor is a hell of a lot more video game than Jedi Fallen Order was. This is so much bigger, so much grander. Structurally, Fallen Order felt like Uncharted 4 or Lost Legacy, more linear and with smaller spaces. Jedi Survivor feels more like God of War, with massive hub worlds to explore full of side quests and secrets, a companion system that sees people fighting alongside you, and even a base management component allowing you to recruit helpful NPCs to build out and enliven your base of operations. But while Respawn have added many things to expand the scope of the Jedi series, they unfortunately have not taken the time to fix any of its core problems. Combat in particular is very weak, and the new combat stances do little to make combat feel deeper or improve its fundamentals, stuff like animation pairing, hit detection, and enemy design. Traversal is similar in the sense that new things have been added to it to make it more interesting, but Respawn's approach to level design means that exploration feels kind of cheap and inorganic, very on rails, a lot of invisible walls, ledges you're not allowed to climb on, etc. To be honest, I really don't mind all that much about those parts of the game remaining the same, because the story that's told here, the characters, this rendition of the Star Wars fiction that I know and love, it's still wonderful, and paired with all those new game systems, Jedi Survivor would have left me very satisfied and very impressed with how much Respawn have reached for here. But I played on PC, and the PC port is a fucking disaster. I am stunned at how badly it runs on both the machines that I tested, and no amount of tinkering on my end could improve things. The two patches that EA deployed while I was reviewing it also did not improve things, and I would say that my enjoyment of this video game was effectively ruined by this horrible PC performance and the bugs. I'm not hard to please with this stuff, by the way, like I will actually put up with a lot. But the scale of issues here is so profound that it just really ruined it for me, and I'm so bummed about that, because were it not for those issues, I probably would have loved this game.
Someday when your children see this, they'll know the Jedi never stopped fighting for them. You barely got me.
Alright, we're going to do performance first because frankly it's fucking abysmal and will absolutely be a deal breaker for the vast majority of people considering picking this up on PC. So firstly, I want to be really clear about which patches I tested on and which patch you will be playing on when the game launches later today. I tested on 3 different patches. The first was a pre-Day Zero build, which is where I did the bulk of my playthrough. This was riddled with issues that EA said would be improved by a Day Zero patch. That Day Zero patch arrived midweek, so I tested on that and did the rest of my playthrough there. It did not improve performance or fix any of the bugs that I was encountering. Finally, the Day 1 patch went live about 24 hours before I uploaded this video, so again I tested what impact that had. I would say it had a minor but ultimately negligible impact on performance. I cannot speak to its impact on bugs because I spent so little time on this patch. I was literally just testing performance under different conditions. So long story short, I have tested the game on the patch you are about to play on. As for the hardware I used, I tested Jedi Survivor on 2 machines. The first was an RTX 2080 Ti with an AMD Ryzen 3700X. That is a decent machine that should be able to handle 1440p high settings gameplay comfortably. The other machine is an RTX 4090 with an AMD Ryzen 5950X. That is a very powerful machine that should be able to handle almost any modern game at 4K max settings. So you should know that I actually don't review games on the 4090 because it's not representative of the average consumer experience. I test games on that just to see what a game can do at the top end, but I review my games on the 2080 Ti because it's closer to baseline. Even then, plenty of people will argue that the 2080 Ti is still too strong a card, but you gotta draw the line somewhere, and I'm choosing the 20 series. So I boot up Jedi Survivor on my 2080 Ti machine. I set it to 4K and crank everything to max, which is what I always do because I then start working backwards to find a combination of settings that will get me to a stable 60 FPS. Because that's the goal here. I'm not going for 144 frames, I'm just looking for a nice, smooth, solid 60. No matter what I did, I could not get this game to run at 60 FPS, and in fact, 40 FPS was basically the hard cap in many of the open plan areas, and that's actually a really important distinction. You can get Jedi Survivor running at a stable frame rate when you're in internal spaces, places with less geometry, less draw distances, less units on the map. On this machine, I can generally manage around 32 to 38 FPS. Open plan spaces are a different story. The game starts on Coruscant, which is one of those open plan environments, and at no point was I able to crack 30 FPS. By this point, I had already dropped down to 1440p high settings because 4K was running so poorly. When I still couldn't get above 30 FPS, I then dropped to medium settings and I noticed something interesting. It made absolutely no difference. I then dropped to 1080p resolution. No difference. I turned off AMD Fidelity FX, which had prior to that been set to quality. That made no difference. I turned Fidelity FX back on, only this time I set it to performance. It did not improve the frame rate one iota, but it did render the game an absurdly blurry mess. Look at this guy's face, it's like abstract painting or something. Just as a laugh, I thought I'd turn on ray tracing. That tanked performance down to a very shonky 20 FPS, but I don't care about that at all because the 20 series has never really been ray tracing capable. You may look at the fact that the settings and resolution changes don't improve performance and think, well, you must be CPU bound. But both GPU and CPU utilization would hover at around the 30% mark when I was doing all of this testing. That is a very, very bad sign that something is seriously wrong with how this game has been optimized. Furthermore, German publication GameStar did some of their own testing. They had the same CPU and GPU utilization rates that I did, and they found that the game was using 18 gigabytes of VRAM when running at 1440p, which is very, very not what's meant to be happening. EA did promise that Day Zero patch. It arrived, it did nothing. Here's me testing the games in similar conditions post the Day Zero patch, and I'm still hard capped at 40 FPS in this area with various settings and various resolutions doing absolutely nothing to improve that frame rate. Finally, I retested all of this on the Day 1 patch and found similar results, though I did notice that GPU utilization had improved and now looked to be doing what it was supposed to be doing. However, it certainly wasn't translating into any more performance. This is how the game runs at 1440p high settings in this open world section, which is definitely one of the more taxing zones, but it's also fully representative of what other open world sections of the game look and play like. That 30 FPS is hard capped, and no settings I change would improve it. What these numbers don't communicate is just how laggy and shitty this feels. Like a solid, properly frame-paced 30 FPS is one thing, but this is not that. It says 30 to 40, but it feels like 20. This section is a good example. It's one that's actually running at around 60 FPS, but all the micro stuttering and frame drops are actually reducing this to about 30 FPS when you look at Nvidia's 99% frame data. So even though it says it's running at 60 FPS, it kind of feels like 30 FPS. Okay, so remember how I said I don't review games on my 2080 Ti? This was the very first time I had to abandon that machine and review a game on my other PC because I found the performance here to be so shit that I just didn't want to have to suffer through any more of it. So that took me over to the RTX 4090 machine. It's a better news story, but not by much. I would remind you that this is basically the most powerful consumer level GPU money can buy, coupled with a very capable CPU. And even then, I cannot hit a reliable 60 FPS when playing at 4K, epic settings, ray tracing turned off. I mean, here it is, right? I'm just standing in a moderately sized area, no enemies around me, no combat, and it's 55 FPS. I turned on Fidelity FX to ultra quality, and that does nothing except, again, just degrade the image. I turned on ray tracing just to see what that was, and that cost me another 15 or so frames with absolutely nothing to show for it. Again, turning everything to low settings made no difference, and dropping to 1440p made no difference. I mean, it's a 4090, ray tracing off, 1440p, hard capped at 55 FPS. Even here, it still feels very sluggish and unresponsive, and the fluctuations are really gonna get ya. I pressed on and reviewed most of the game on this machine. You're gonna see a lot of footage that is running at 70 FPS or even higher, which yeah, the game can absolutely hit that at times. But you're also gonna see it dropping down to 30 FPS or 20 FPS when I open that map. The open world areas are particularly painful, and that's a deal breaker because the entire thing that sets Jedi Survivor apart from Jedi Fallen Order is how big its worlds are now. These are massive, explorable, semi-open world spaces, and as you're exploring them, your frame rate is fluctuating wildly based on where you are and what you're doing and who knows what else. And that is just the frame rate, which doesn't include graphical glitches and pop-in, which aren't terribly egregious, but they're noticeable for sure. The biggest issue though, and it is utterly game-breaking, is an audio issue affecting almost every cutscene. Here's how I watched about 80% of the cutscenes in this game.
Traffic. Looks like this portal's under maintenance.
As soon as we breach the surface, jump to light speed.
Took some hits back there. You mind running diagnostics while I transmit the intel? Gyro's failing. You need that.
No, don't touch that dial. It's not your YouTube that's fucking up, it's this fucking video game. The desyncing of audio, the repeating of that audio, it was this plague that affected both PCs I tested on, and nothing I did could fix it. The Day Zero patch also did not fix it. I've not seen enough cutscenes on the Day 1 patch to know whether or not that patch has fixed this, so there is still a chance that this issue will still be present in the game when it launches, but don't quote me on that. Like I said, I can't confirm one way or the other. Just briefly, I have seen the reviews from people playing on PS5 and Xbox. They don't say that it's great performance, and many reviewers do call out issues, but overall performance seems to be much better. If you are planning on picking up this game, I would recommend doing so on a console because the PC port is, yeah, and I mean, look, some important caveats. PCs are fickle things. I've seen some PC reviewers who haven't experienced the same issues that I have and report fairly good performance, but I've personally spoken to 4 PC reviewers who all experienced something similar to this. It pains me to say it because I like this game, but it's just one of the worst optimized PC ports I've seen in a long time, and we have had some real stinkers lately. I mean, I did not recommend Wild Hearts on the basis of its PC performance, despite the fact that that was actually a great game. Jedi Survivor's performance is many orders of magnitude worse than that, for me at least, and I strongly recommend that anyone playing on PC hold off until you can be sure that EA and Respawn have fixed this, because right now it is just straight up busted. Jedi Survivor picks up a few years after the events of Jedi Fallen Order. Cal Kestis, one of the few remaining Jedi, continues his fight against an increasingly ascendant empire, but he's doing so alone at this point. The troop of resistance fighters he'd gathered to him earlier have all gone their separate ways, and Cal has been forced to reckon with what a life alone and on the run looks like. Spoiler alert, he's not having much fun. Jedi Survivor has a difficult task in that origin stories are naturally very compelling, whereas the follow-ups are always harder to do. It's more difficult to excavate a character's strengths, foibles, motivations, and eccentricities when a lot of that excavation work has already been done. To its credit, Jedi Survivor does a pretty good job of showcasing a new dimension to not only Cal, but to the Jedi code he hopes to live by, and the very nature of the resistance he and his companions are engaged in. Cal Kestis, played by Cameron Monaghan, is still the very center of every moment in this experience, and as a character written by Respawn, brought to life by its technical teams, and performed by Monaghan, Cal Kestis continues to shine. He channels the boyish charm and idealism of Mark Hamill's Luke Skywalker with a more grizzled world weariness that comes from the events of his earlier years. He is brave and self-certain without being foolhardy or arrogant. He is resolute but also open to being convinced. Critically, he cares deeply about those around him when the code he lives by demands detachment. That's a central thread that runs through the course of Jedi Survivor. Are you still a Jedi if you put your friends first? Are you still a Jedi if you want to keep fighting when there's a chance for peace? What even is a Jedi when most of them have been wiped out? And why shouldn't that definition change when the old tenets of Jedi faith failed to keep the Republic safe? These questions are asked both directly and indirectly during your adventure, though I will say they're a little underexplored, resulting in some of that, ludo-narrative dissonance. Cal is a Jedi who mind controls innocent native fauna to use as weapons, and then cuts them down in cold blood once he no longer has use for them. He murders scores of stormtroopers and raiders without ever appearing bothered by that. I know this is a video game and we shouldn't overthink it, but I think it's a really well-written video game for the most part, which invites this sort of, criticism and engagement. While I think the narrative does gesture towards the tensions between Cal's actions and the Jedi Code, I don't think it goes far enough to reconcile those tensions, or to call them out as things that Cal is truly grappling with. Of course, Cal is just one of the many characters you'll meet along the way. Some of them make a return from the previous game, but there are plenty of new ones too. Bode is the real standout, voiced by Noshir Dalal, whose voice you'll absolutely recognize since he's done a huge amount of stuff in the gaming space.
So I heard you fought the Empire on Kashyyyk.
Yeah?
Hijacked a walker and broke open an Imperial prison camp single-handed.
He's just a really well-written, well-acted character that I loved hanging out with. He's the sort of scoundrel archetype in the Star Wars universe, but with an emotional twist that makes him very real and really grounds everything he says and does. But yeah, he's got that swagger that makes his character fit into this world, and it's the perfect example of just how much Respawn gets Star Wars. His character interactions really are the highlight of the game, to be honest with you. In quiet conversations between party members where they explore their most closely guarded secrets, their greatest hopes and fears, this is where the game shines brightest, I think, because it's an ensemble cast full of characters that you just always want to hear more from. Following closely behind that, though, are the set pieces and the swashbuckling adventure. I mean, I don't think Jedi Survivor has a particularly good plot. I think it's a lot of MacGuffin chasing, I think it's full of a lot of very convenient contrivances, but the way the plot is able to spirit you to new locations and the way it sets up these incredible action-packed sequences, it's amazing, frankly. Just as Respawn really understand how to craft Star Wars characters, they really know how to craft an authentic feeling Star Wars adventure. Again, at a time when Star Wars feels somewhat adrift. I'm pretty down on most of the contemporary Star Wars stuff at the moment, but Jedi Survivor really reminded me, just as Jedi Fallen Order did, why I fell in love with this universe in the first place, and why I'll continue to love it for a long time yet. By far and away, the biggest change that Jedi Survivor delivers is its structure and scope. The previous game was fairly linear and its explorable spaces more modest. Here in the sequel, the game is still very linear in its golden path, but the absolutely huge worlds you can now explore do so much to broaden the scale of this adventure. There are only a handful of planets you can visit here, around 6, but that number sells short just how much real estate there is to explore here and the way that these planets are carved up. Kobo is a good example. It's the first planet you'll visit after you flee Coruscant, and it houses a village that sort of becomes your base of operations. In addition to that, the map has several massive explorable sections that are initially closed off to you until you gain the ability to access them later on. Kobo seems really large the first time you get there, but you have only seen about 1/6 of it by the time you finish your first tour of it, and as it opens up, you'll realize that some of these individual sections are as large as some of the destinations you visited in Jedi Fallen Order. Exploring these spaces is really nice and really worthwhile so long as you're down for that gameplay style and the unique type of rewards that are on offer. Most of the time, exploring these spaces involves traversal challenges. You'll see a way forward and you'll be like, what's up or down there? So you'll climb or slide or wall run or swing or any combination of those things, and then you'll get a skill point unlock or a chest with some rewards in it. Funnily enough, combat challenges aren't a huge feature of these worlds. I'd imagine that they'd be full of gauntlet-style encounters or mini-bosses guarding things. There's definitely a bit of that for sure, but not a lot. For the most part, exploring space in Jedi Survivor is a lot of running and a lot of jumping. It's kind of like Jedi Mario. I know that sort of gameplay loop won't appeal to everyone because I know there are plenty of people who weren't a fan with the way that these games handled traversal. I mean, yeah, it is pretty basic most of the time. It is jumping between platforms and climbing slowly up and down things and wall running. There are new upgrades that become available later on, like the ability to dash through the air, which, yeah, it gets the job done, but it hardly transforms the way Cal moves through these worlds. For me, I think exploration in this game is held back by a fairly constrictive approach to level design. Very often, it's unclear where this game wants you to go, and so what you'll end up doing is opening your map, which will tell you where the nearest door or climbable object is. I don't want to be led by the nose, but nor do I want to feel so disoriented that I need to rely on a map just to get my bearings. A lot of that is to do with the fact that things you think you might be able to jump on, or jump to, or climb on, or wall run on, etc., you just can't. Jedi Survivor is full of things like invisible walls or ledges that stop you from using geometry in an organic way. You can't creatively solve a jumping puzzle by using some part of the environment in a way that Respawn did not intend. There is one way to solve every traversal puzzle, and one way only, and any attempt to deviate from that path, it's always met with failure. Still, I don't want to sound too down on all of this. It's enough for me. I enjoyed rolling through this, I enjoyed going through the motions. Yeah, my enjoyment ebbed and flowed for sure, but overall it was fine. One of the things that kept me motivated in all of this was the rewards economy incentivizing me to explore. So I mentioned that you can unlock skill points, sure. You can also get some experience points, absolutely. But the main thing you will get when you explore are cosmetics. There are a huge number of cosmetics that you can collect and apply here in Jedi Survivor, from haircuts to outfits to paint jobs to actual lightsaber components. And to be clear, these components do not have any stats on them. They are just about making a cool looking lightsaber. And get this, scattered throughout the world are all these workbenches where you can customize your BD droid, your blaster, and your lightsaber. At first I was like, surely these benches must eventually allow me to customize my lightsaber in such a way that I can improve its stats or whatever. Because why would you have all of these benches around if it was just to change the cosmetic appearance of a lightsaber? That would be dumb, right? But no, as I kept playing and unlocking more lightsaber components, I would get excited when I would discover a new workbench, because it was a chance for me to apply those components and to continue to refine my own personal lightsaber. And this feature ended up being one of my favorite parts of the entire game. I think it really speaks to just how much Respawn understands Star Wars and the mind of a Star Wars fan. Because what other game has benches strewn about it that only allow you to customize the look of a weapon? Respawn know that to a Star Wars fan, customizing the look of your own lightsaber is fucking sick. And they not only let you do that, but they also made it the primary incentive for side content and exploration in this game. That is a ballsy move, and goddamn do I respect it. You're not just customizing your own personal cowl doll though, you're also collecting people. Okay, probably could have worded that better, but what I mean is that through your travels, you'll meet various NPCs, and if you choose to help them by doing side quests, they'll agree to come back with you to your settlement on Kobo, lending whatever skills they might have to your cause. This opens up all sorts of side activities there, from a stable yard where you can mount up and ride out, to a rooftop garden where you can plant stuff, to an auto chess style minigame, to a DJ that takes requests. None of this stuff gives you any sort of gameplay enhancing bonus, by the way. There aren't new stats, new moves, or new upgrades that come from any of it. It's just a thing you can do to sink deeper into the Star Wars universe, and it's brilliant. It's slice of life stuff in the Outer Rim territories. It's like Animal Crossing on Tatooine. Why hasn't someone made that yet? I don't know, but Respawn were obviously asking the same question, so they basically made it here. There are so many thrills to be had in that main storyline, so many heartfelt moments between characters, so much to explore in these massive worlds, but it's kind of nice to know that there's also all of these other little tiny details that Respawn have focused on, and the motivation isn't power-ups or like a level 15 lightsaber that does 2.7% more damage than the level 14 lightsaber. It's just cool Star Wars shit that lets you be in the Star Wars universe doing Star Wars things, and that is fucking rad. Gotta say, if there's one area where I'm a little disappointed with Jedi Survivor, it's the combat. To be clear, Respawn never overhyped it or failed to deliver anything they promised. We played the last game and the combat was fine, and if we expected anything different here, then we really only have ourselves to blame, because Respawn were not hyping up an all-new revitalized approach to combat or whatever. But yeah, I mean, this is Respawn, right? They make some of the best first-person shooter combat on the market in Titanfall and Apex. It stands to reason that we should expect a similarly high bar from them when it comes to melee combat, but that is definitely not the case. Combat in Jedi Survivor is by no means bad, but it's also not good. It's a perfectly serviceable, accessible combat model that's going to work for casual Star Wars fans who don't play many games, or for anyone who just wants to feel like a Jedi for 20 to 30 hours. But anyone who's serious about melee combat games, or anyone who's looking for a deeply flexible, replayable combat model, Sadly, I don't think you're going to find what you're looking for here. Similar to the rest of Jedi Survivor, Respawn has added things to the combat here without fixing or deepening the things that were already there. There are now a total of 5 different combat stances: single-handed, dual-wield, double-bladed, as well as the blaster combo where you're running around with a lightsaber in one hand and a blaster in the other. And finally, there's the crossguard stance, which is channeling Kylo Ren's aggressive two-handed bastard sword style, complete with cool little jets kicking off the side of your lightsaber hilt. So this is an impressive number of stances, but the problem is that they're all pretty shallow and none of them connect to one another in any way. There's really only 1 or 2 combos you can do within each stance. You can unlock around 3 or 4 abilities within each stance, but most of them are just kind of one and done type attacks rather than things that can be woven into a combo. There are no combos or attacks that link you into another stance, which would have been cool because that would have encouraged you to move between the stances more often. In fact, you can only have 2 stances equipped at any one moment, and if you want to equip a new one, you have to go back to either a meditation point or a workbench. Furthermore, you only have a limited number of skill upgrade points to go around, and you need to choose which stance you invest those in. I think this was a really bad call from Respawn. Given how shallow the movesets are for each of these stances, it would have made sense to allow you to move between all of them freely with some kind of radial wheel or something. But what will most likely happen is that you'll stick with 1 or 2 because that's all you can equip, and that's where you've invested all your points, and the other stances kind of just get forgotten. I also think it would have been cool if these stances had more unique utility, like the double-bladed style is really good for AoE attacks, sure, and the blaster is really good for shooting flying enemies, absolutely. But outside of that, the stances definitely lack distinctiveness. I never once encountered a boss or a scenario and thought, oh, I better equip this stance for this moment because that will work best. All of the stances work as well as each other, which is fine on one level, but it does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity. One of the reasons why all of the stances work all the time is because combat never really demands much of you. Playing on the default difficulty, it was very easy 95% of the time. The only time it would get hard was against some of the creature bosses who, for some reason, just one-shot you. Like, that's it. They just straight up one-shot you, and they have these really shitty animations, and yeah, those boss enemies really do suck, to be honest with you. I think that speaks to a broader problem with the overall combat fundamentals here. Combat doesn't feel weighty enough, enemy attack patterns aren't interesting to engage with, the way things like animation pairing and hitbox detection work, it's always prioritizing the spectacle of combat rather than the function of combat. I never felt truly skillful while playing this game because the lack of combos, abilities, the shallow enemy design, and the sloppy melee animations all meant I was just kind of pressing buttons rather than trying to be more deliberate. If you compare this to the likes of God of War or character action games like Bayonetta, it is chalk and cheese. But even more arcade-style games like Hi-Fi Rush offer a significantly more interesting and rewarding combat experience than Jedi Survivor manages to here. You know, as I said at the top, these shortcomings really don't bother me all that much. I would like there to be a more free-form approach to traversal and exploration, but the fact that it's very restrictive is fine, it's okay. The combat, it would have been nice if Respawn had focused on what they had and made it better by fixing some of the core issues, but again, it's fine, I really don't mind at all. And that's because I'm really in this series for Respawn's wonderful take on the Star Wars universe. And I really hope that I've communicated just how much I love what Respawn have done here with these characters, this story, these set pieces, the slice of life stuff, the ability to craft my own lightsaber. I mean, I've said it multiple times, but I'll say it again. Respawn really get Star Wars. They get it. And it's so nice to just see them do their thing again. And I am eagerly awaiting the next installment in this series because long may it continue. But this PC performance is horrific, and just in case you had any doubts, as I'm finalizing the script, the game is launching on all platforms, Steam reviews are pouring in, and the game is already sitting at mostly negative 23%, with every negative review listing all the problems that I have detailed here in this review. One review reads, quote, "Runs like my ass after Taco Bell," end quote. It certainly does, random Steam user. It certainly does. And I am fucking over it. It sucks being a PC gamer and just constantly getting fed shitty port after shitty port, being forced to wait weeks or months for fixes. It's like a fucking epidemic at this point. And EA, unfortunately, are one of the worst offenders. I mean, look at Wild Hearts just recently, and obviously, a while before that, Battlefield 2042. And can I just say this to finish? I actually like what EA are doing with their non-sports portfolio. They're making cool games with no microtransactions, and they're doing interesting things, and I support it. I really do. But they are arresting all of the momentum that these games could have had by putting them out broken. And it seems like such a silly way to burn through all of the goodwill that you are aiming to foster with games like this. Just delay them until they are ready to go. That's it. We are okay to wait. Just delay the game until it's finished, because this ruined a game that I was excited for. And technical issues aside, having seen how much love and care has gone into this thing, I really hate to say that I absolutely cannot recommend Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Alright, so I recently had to make a trip to Melbourne to go hands-on with The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, and along for the ride came this bad boy, the all-new MSI Stealth 14 Studio. This thing is all new. It's part of the MSI 2023 product refresh that I covered earlier this month. I was one of the first people in Australia to get my hands on with it, and yeah, this thing is pretty nuts. It gets most of its grunt from the RTX 40 series GPU. This is among the first laptops to hit the market with the 40 series, bringing with it the huge benefits of this generation of graphics hardware. What are those benefits? Well, on top of the raw processing power of 40 series GPUs, Nvidia's latest gen hardware also delivers DLSS 3, a technology which can massively increase your frames per second in any game that supports it. DLSS 3 uses AI to interlace additional frames into those being rendered by your hardware, which can more than double or even triple your base frame rates. This sort of performance headroom enables things like Cyberpunk's new Overdrive ray tracing update, which I covered earlier this month as well. This is what's called full ray tracing, and it's the most realistic rendition of light, shadows, and reflections we've ever seen in a video game. All of it enabled by and exclusive to Nvidia's 40 series hardware. The MSI Stealth 14 Studio is able to take advantage of all that technology because it has a 40 series GPU, but that's not all it's packing. It's rocking the latest 13th gen Core i7 Intel processor. It has a Quad HD 240Hz screen, DDR5 memory, a PCIe Gen 4 SSD, and tons more. All of this is supported by MSI's vapor chamber cooling, providing industry-leading thermals, allowing you to push even more performance out of all of this hardware. And believe it or not, MSI have managed to squeeze everything I have just described into a laptop that weighs 1.7 kilograms, which is just insane. This is true. It's such a good laptop that I've actually asked MSI if I can take it to LA with me in June for the Summer Games Fest, because I need something this powerful but also this portable, allowing me to make content and play games on the move while packing as light as possible. Nvidia GeForce RTX 40 series laptops really are the ultimate play, and if you want to get the best hardware, the best technology like ray tracing and DLSS 3, and the best build quality, features, and cooling, then the MSI Stealth 14 Studio is for you. Click the link below to learn more. Thanks MSI and Nvidia for sponsoring the video, and thank you for watching it.